The Knives Out films are an homage to the classic whodunit story and fun popcorn flicks all around, but if you're willing to look a bit deeper, you'll see that the films actually provide a lot of commentary about the modern world. The first film has a heavy commentary on family, immigration, and entitlement. The second, Glass Onion, talks about the performance of intelligence through money and success. And the latest entry, Wake Up Dead Man, discusses religion, cults of personality, and blind faith. But gender actually plays a central role in each of these films, with aspects of the idea of masculinity being criticized, challenged, and generally deconstructed. And this video aims to talk about how all of the Knives Out films deconstruct masculinity. And to do that, we will have to discuss spoilers, so please be informed that this video will be pulling from the following. And I think the best place to start with how the films deconstruct masculinity is with a character synonymous with the series, Benoit Blanc. Blanc is a character that perfectly blends aspects of old-school Hollywood masculinity with modern ideals. Benoit is a gentleman. He's soft-spoken, polite, and generally respectful to everybody around him. He's suave, intelligent, confident in his own ability, without letting it inflate his own ego. As a leading man, he kind of reminds me of how Hollywood would portray James Bond, and I don't just say that because of who's playing him. It's a sort of cool, collected, and quiet confidence that is honestly a bit of an art form in this day and age where men believe that to get noticed, they have to be loud and proud. But Benoit blends this old-fashioned charm of his with a new expectation of the modern man: empathy. For decades, men have been socialized to be emotionally repressed, taught to hide their feelings, and to show any kind of strong emotion besides maybe anger would be to compromise one's own masculinity. As a result, we as a society have grown to equate emotional suppression with being a man. But a side effect of this phenomenon is that men have grown to not only be blind to their own emotions, but to those of other people as well. Men don't talk about their feelings with each other, and thus don't really know how to recognize when their fellow man may be going through some sort of difficulty. Empathy among men is in short supply, even today, and that's why I would argue that Benoit's defining characteristic isn't his intellect or his confidence, but rather his empathy. Throughout the series, Benoit makes choices not to show off how smart he is or to make himself look good, but to help those in need. And this is emphasized by Blanc's motivations. Blanc isn't motivated by money, but rather by his own curiosity and altruism. He doesn't get hired to solve a case, he takes a personal interest, and even when he's deduced factual evidence instead of trying to point fingers, he instead sits back and tries to find the full story. He's an active listener with an inquisitive mind, reading in between the lines to find the bigger picture. Blanc also separates himself from other leading men as the character is openly gay. And the interesting thing is that most people wouldn't be able to tell from the films immediately, but the director Rian Johnson has confirmed that he obviously is, and this sort of quiet representation just adds to the character. For the longest time, gay characters have been tokenized, existing to check a box and portraying their homosexuality in such an exaggerated way, turning their sexual orientation into the character's defining trait rather than having it be just a part of their person. Which is why I enjoy that Blanc isn't defined by his sexuality. He's not the gay character, he's a character that happens to be gay, if you catch my meaning. And just like how homosexuality is just a part of Benoit's character, Blanc is only a part of how these films deconstruct masculinity as a whole. And let's begin with the film where it all started, the original Knives Out. The main conflict in the story is that of succession. Who claims the right to the throne before fortune after the untimely death of the family patriarch? And historically, succession has always been a matter of birth. What does one claim after the man of the house dies? And typically this would be a question of birthright, not just in terms of birth order, but also biological sex. In medieval times, men were the only ones ever seen as fit to lead, from countries to cities to households. The role of a woman had always been to support the man or marry a man befitting of the throne if a ruler were to have no male heir. And it's why medieval stories like Game of Thrones and its spin-offs have entire plot lines dedicated to lineage and bloodlines. And it's why throughout history, being born as a man is likened to winning a coin flip, because historically speaking, men have always been entitled to more than women. And this idea of male entitlement is encapsulated very well by the first Knives Out film. The film's main antagonists are the Thrombey family members, but a few of them take the limelight in the narrative. First, there's Richard Drysdale, the husband of Linda Thrombey. While his wife was especially close to her father, the esteemed author Harlan Thrombey, Richard doesn't have any real relation to him besides marrying his daughter. But through marriage, he does have a claim to a portion of Harlan's money. But the problem is Richard cheated on Linda and Harlan caught him in the act, and subsequently threatens to tell his daughter what happened if Richard doesn't come clean. And yet, Richard feels a sense of entitlement to Harlan's fortune because by marriage, he is Harlan's son-in-law, but by cheating on his own wife, he violates the very bonds that supposedly bind him to the Thrombeys in the first place. Richard's cheating also serves as a criticism of those who claim to value family. He portrays himself as a loving family man and yet cheated on his wife and broke the sanctity of their marriage. Does Richard still deserve a piece of the Thrombey pie despite violating the loyalty and responsibility required of being a father and husband? And while you've answered that question, let's move on to the next Thrombey family member to discuss, Walt, the youngest of Harlan's children, and for most of his life was in charge of managing Harlan's publishing company. But Walt never did anything to justify that position within the company besides being Harlan's son. Walt is, as the kids call it, a nepo baby, and his entire life revolves around the success of his father. He doesn't write the books that made his family millions, he's kind of just an administrator, not a visionary like Harlan. He believes that he deserves a cut of Harlan's fortune because he's the one who served him the most by running the publishing company, but the truth is, as the narrative shows, he's practically useless. The other characters in the film comment on how Walt is a leech, a parasite, and even he must realize how pathetic he is, and we see that when his father cuts him off from the family fortune. It's Walt who is the most desperate. He's the one who goes to Marta's home to beg her to rebuke Harlan's inheritance money and give him back what he feels is rightfully his. And finally, there's Ransom, who represents the worst kind of male entitlement. He doesn't try to disguise his belief that he deserves the money behind family like Richard or service like Walt. Despite being the black sheep of the Thrombeys, Ransom believes that he's entitled to Harlan's money just because he is. Even if he had a shouting match with Harlan during his own birthday and fled the scene, he thinks he has a claim to Harlan's money just because. And when that entitlement is challenged, he's willing to kill for it. And all of these characters defend that entitlement, that so-called right to their inheritance when Harlan dies, because they know that they are nothing without it, which is the exact opposite of Linda Thrombey, Harlan's only daughter. Unlike the male characters mentioned, Linda doesn't really care much about what happens to the inheritance. Unlike her husband, who married into her family's money, or Walt, who never made a name for himself, Linda earned her wealth through her own ventures in real estate. She's a self-made woman who doesn't really care all that much about her father's fortune. Linda exists as a foil to the entitled men in her family. Because she never felt entitled to her father's money, she was able to make her own path in life and live independently from the Thrombey name. She never felt entitled because of whom she married or whom she was born to. She earned her own fortune through her own merit and effort. And speaking of fortune, money is at the forefront of all of these films. The Knives Out films are also commentaries on how money can corrupt and compel people to do horrible things to each other. But the second film in the series talks about another aspect of money: influence. We as a culture have grown to perceive people with immense wealth as higher beings. We see people who are rich beyond our wildest imaginations and think they are better than everybody else in some way. Men specifically have a history of flaunting their wealth as a symbol of status, and we also equate men in power with men having more masculinity and being in control, when in reality this image of rich men being manly and powerful is really just an image. but these powerful men themselves are still as human and flawed as the rest of us. And that's the whole point of Glass Onion. The film's main antagonist, Miles Braun, is a criticism of the myth of the genius tech bro. Miles is more of a performer than a technological visionary. He needs people to believe that he's smart, confident, and innovative, but he's really hiding behind jargon, grand gestures, and self-mythologizing. Like a glass onion, Miles tries to appear that he's layered, but you see right through him and can tell that he has no substance. Much like the tech bros that this film loves to criticize. These tech entrepreneurs have invested so much money into getting the average person to believe that they're larger than life when really they're not. They're human beings, and as human beings do, make errors. People try to paint these tech billionaires as masculine icons that have transcended humanity, but really they're not all that special. A real life example is Elon Musk. He's a controversial figure these days, but he's painted himself as a creative visionary and thinker. It's gone to the point where his name has become a buzzword, and tying his name to a company or product would immediately generate headlines. Even if he isn't producing results, he's magically made people believe that he can, and it's all part of his plan. It's why the value of Tesla stock keeps going up, because people believe in Musk as a visionary, rather than Tesla as a company. And this is in spite of falling Tesla sales and rising competition from other EV manufacturers in the global market, particularly from China. Miles Braun is a direct critique of how tech entrepreneurs market their names rather than their own products or services. In fact, his company, Alpha, is left intentionally vague as to what they sell or do. It's never really made clear what the company that made him millions actually does for its customers. And this company, by the way, was never his idea in the first place. The plot surrounding the murder mystery in this film is that the idea for Alpha was stolen from somebody else. Much like how you can argue that Zuckerberg's idea for Facebook was, in a way, stolen from the Winklevoss twins. And by criticizing the tech bro genius, the film also criticizes those who idolize them. Because these people aren't masculine icons as their cult of personality seems to claim them as. They're not meant to be idolized. In fact, they definitely used morally questionable means to achieve their version of success. Miles Braun isn't a smart person. He only pretends to be and props himself up as one using his money. His murder plan is sloppy and poorly executed, and when Benoit Blanc exclaims, "It's just dumb," he's telling the other characters and the audience that Miles's plan only worked not because he was a genius, but because people believed he was. And sometimes that's all you need to fool people. Which leads me to the most recent film within the Knives Out universe, Wake Up Dead Man. Much like how Glass Onion is a critique of tech bros, Wake Up Dead Man is not just a critique of religious hypocrites, but anybody with a religious cult-like following who uses their position of influence to proliferate their so-called truths. Influencers, podcasters, politicians. While the film heavily utilizes religious imagery, the message applies to all of these just as well. I believe one of the biggest problems plaguing young men in social media right now are these influencers poisoning the minds of their audiences. They sell them these ideas that they can be manlier, richer, and more attractive to women if they subscribe to their beliefs and defend them at every front. They sell this idea of masculinity and tie it to their brands and being part of their following. So if you're not part of their in-group, you're automatically against them and against the idea of being a man. And that's the problem with the modern day connotations of masculinity. It's no longer affiliated with being a paragon of chivalry, being a gentleman, and respecting other people, like it always was. Instead, these podcasters have tainted masculinity, equating it with status, money, and ability to attract women. And we see the film's critique of these podcasters through Monsignor Wicks. As a character, Wicks portrays himself as someone holier. Not in a religious sense, but in a moral sense. He tries to create this image of being a grand, performative authority figure that everybody respects. He insists that he's called Monsignor, which is a lofty title within the Catholic Church. His sermons are more performances than preaching, but through them he's gathered a flock of individuals who are willing to seemingly follow him till the ends of the earth. And the people in this flock are all lost and broken in some way. They are washed up has-beens, spurned lovers, and generally unhappy with their lives. And yet Wicks promises them salvation from their problem. The same way these alpha male podcasters sell the idea of masculinity to lost young men. And behind all of that smoke and mirrors, Monsignor Wicks is a horrible person. For a priest, he is far from the model individual that those who follow clerical discipline are meant to be. He commits sins constantly and confesses them to Judd to try and absolve himself of them, but makes no effort to avoid making those same mistakes in the future. He drinks excessively, right in the house of God. He exploits his influence to extort his followers for money, and he even physically harms Father Judd. Wicks is a sinner and hypocrite, and yet people virtually worship him because he speaks loudly and confidently enough for the most vulnerable people to listen to. In a sense, maybe the Knives Out films aren't actually deconstructing masculinity. Maybe instead they're reminders on what masculinity really is before weirdos started co-opting it. Across all three films, the men who believe themselves most deserving of power, wealth, and reverence are the ones with the least substance to justify it. In contrast, Benoit Blanc represents an alternative model of masculinity that the films quietly but firmly endorse. He is confident without being egotistical, intelligent without being cruel, and emotionally open without being weak. Unlike Braun and Wicks, he listens more than he speaks. And when he listens, he does so actively and thinks critically. Blanc's masculinity isn't based on money, admiration, or authority, but on empathy, restraint, and moral clarity. Values that men used to have, and quite frankly, we should bring back. And that contrast is the key. The Knives Out series argues that masculinity itself is not the problem. It's the performance of masculinity that is. When manliness becomes a costume worn to justify cruelty, silencing others, and excusing harm, that's when it becomes corrosive. But when masculinity is grounded instead in accountability, compassion for your fellow man, and self-awareness, it becomes something powerful. But across all three films, the message is clear. The loudest men in the room are rarely the strongest, and typically are also the ones who have earned nothing at all.